In a shocking development that captured the attention of the nation, President Trump announced an unprecedented move, cutting off federal funding to the state of California. The announcement immediately sent ripples through political circles, media outlets, and everyday citizens, sparking debates over legality, ethics, the real-world consequences of such a drastic measure. While Trump framed it as a necessary step to hold California accountable for mismanaged resources and policy defiance, the reaction was swift and fiery, particularly from Governor Gavin Newsom. Within minutes, the nation was witnessing a dramatic showdown that highlighted deep divides between federal authority and state autonomy, setting the stage for a confrontation that would dominate headlines and social media feeds alike. This story is not just about politics, it's about power, it's governance, and the lives of millions of Californians caught in the middle of an escalating national debate. When Trump stepped before the cameras to deliver his announcement, the tone in Washington shifted instantly. This was not just another political statement or routine policy change, it was a declaration that reverberated across the nation. In his unmistakable style, Trump declared that California's federal funding would be cut off, effective immediately. For a moment, even seasoned reporters appeared stunned, as if they were watching history unfold in real time. The air in the briefing room grew heavy as the implications sank in. California, the most populous state in the country, was suddenly being thrust into financial uncertainty by the stroke of a president's words. Trump framed his decision as a matter of principle, saying California's leadership had failed to respect federal authority and wasted resources. That came from the American people. He argued that taxpayers across the nation should not be forced to subsidize what he called reckless governance. His language was sharp, deliberate, and aimed directly at California's Democratic leadership, whom he painted as irresponsible stewards of federal money. The announcement carried the hallmarks of Trump's political strategy: bold, divisive, and calculated to energize his base. The shock factor was immediate. Networks interrupted regular programming, and social media platforms lit up within minutes. Hashtags began trending, with supporters celebrating what they saw as long overdue accountability. While critics decried it as a dangerous abuse of executive power, analysts rushed to explain the mechanics of federal funding. But the broader public fixated on the drama of the moment: one man, wielding presidential authority, taking on an entire state government. For California, the stakes could not have been higher. Billions of dollars in federal aid support programs ranging from healthcare to infrastructure, disaster relief, and education. To cut that funding, even hypothetically, would be to disrupt the lives of millions of residents. Hospitals rely on federal contributions to keep emergency rooms open. Schools depend on grants to maintain vital programs. State agencies use federal resources to respond to wildfires, earthquakes, and droughts. By targeting this lifeline, Trump was not only clashing with Governor Newsom, but also sending a direct message to every Californian who depends on those services behind the cameras. Aides scrambled to provide context. Some whispered that the move was part of a broader negotiation strategy, while others believed it was a symbolic gesture designed to dominate headlines. Either way, the effect was undeniable. Trump had seized the national spotlight yet again, positioning himself as the central actor in a drama that forced everyone's supporters, critics, and undecided observers to take sides. The announcement also underscored the deepening divide between federal and state power. Historically, tensions have flared between Washington and California on issues like immigration, environmental policy, and healthcare. But rarely had a president so openly threatened to pull financial support as a means of exerting pressure. Legal scholars quickly began debating whether such a decision was even enforceable, that the immediate concern was less about legality and more about optics. Trump had thrown down a gauntlet, daring California to respond, and in that moment, truth became clear. The fight was no longer theoretical. It was personal, it was political, and it was public. Trump had set the stage for a battle that would not only test California's resilience, but also redefine the boundaries of executive power. For millions of Americans watching, it was the shock and spectacle of politics at its rawest form. Asterisk when Governor Gavin Newsom appeared on live television. the nation witnessed a rare and unfiltered moment of political fury. The cameras caught him mid-breath, eyes blazing, voice rising with every sentence as he responded to Trump's announcement. Normally measured in tone, Newsom this time was anything but restrained. He slammed his fist on the podium, leaned forward, and accused the president of holding Californians hostage in a reckless political game. His words cut through the static of politics as usual, making it clear that he saw the funding cut not as a policy disagreement, but as an assault on the people of his state. The broadcast carried a raw energy that captivated millions. Clips of Newsom's speech spread across every platform within minutes, replayed again and again by both his supporters and critics. On Twitter, short soundbites of him shouting, "This is not leadership, it's extortion," gained millions of views in hours. On Instagram, a freeze frame of his fiery expression became an instant meme. Even late-night hosts began referencing the moment before their writers had fully scripted the jokes. Newsom's rage was unfiltered, unscripted, and impossible to ignore. What made his outburst even more compelling was the emotional undercurrent running through it. He invoked families in California relying on healthcare funding, children whose schools depended on federal support, and firefighters risking their lives to protect communities. At one point, his voice cracked as he spoke about hospital workers already stretched thin, who now faced the prospect of doing more with less. This was not just a governor defending his policies. It was a man fighting for the dignity of his constituents. That vulnerability, paired with his fire, gave his words a resonance far beyond the walls of Sacramento. Of course, critics were quick to pounce. Political opponents mocked his display as theatrics designed to distract from California's mismanagement. Conservative pundits played split-screen footage, showing Trump calmly delivering his announcement on one side and Newsom shouting on the other, framing the governor as unstable and unfit. But even in criticism, they could not ignore the power of the moment. His reaction dominated news cycles, pushing every other story down the line. It became clear that Trump had struck a nerve, and Newsom's televised eruption ensured the clash would define the week. For his supporters, the performance was cathartic. In the face of what they saw as federal bullying, Newsom's refusal to stay quiet felt like a rallying cry. California residents flooded call-in shows and online comment sections with praise for their governor's passion. Hashtags like #StandWithNewsom and #DefendCalifornia trended alongside Trump's own narratives, creating a digital battleground where words and memes carried almost as much weight as policy. The significance of the live reaction cannot be overstated. Political statements are often carefully crafted, rehearsed, and filtered through advisors. Newsom's meltdown was none of those things. It was spontaneous, raw, and deeply human. That authenticity gave his message traction, even among viewers who did not agree with him politically. People may forget carefully worded press releases, but they rarely forget moments when leaders reveal their emotions in real time. As the cameras rolled, Newsom transformed from just another politician into the face of defiance. His performance on live TV ensured that this clash with Trump would not fade quickly. Instead, it would escalate into one of the most watched and debated showdowns in recent political memory. By the time the broadcast ended, one thing was certain: America had just witnessed the ignition of a battle that was bound to grow louder, sharper, and far more consequential. When Trump outlined the justification behind cutting California's federal funding, he framed it as a matter of accountability and fairness. He argued that California had become a chronic violator of federal standards, pointing to disputes over immigration enforcement, environmental regulations, and fiscal management. In his words, California was taking more than it gives and refusing to align with national priorities. To his supporters, this sounded like a long-awaited correction, a bold leader, finally standing up to what they viewed as a rogue state. To his critics, however, the explanation seemed thin, more of a political excuse than a practical policy rationale. Trump claimed that federal money was being misused, citing examples of programs he described as bloated or inefficient. He suggested that disaster relief funds had been mishandled, that infrastructure dollars had gone unaccounted for. and that California's sanctuary city policies actively undermined federal law. His tone suggested that this wasn't just about budgets or audits, it was about principle. Why should hardworking Americans in Texas, Ohio, or Florida pay for California's bad choices? He asked. The framing was clear. California had become the villain in a narrative of national fairness. Asterisk, but behind the fiery language. Analysts quickly noted gaps. Cutting funding outright was not only unusual, but potentially illegal without congressional approval. Historically, presidents had threatened to withhold funds, but few had dared to fully announce such sweeping cuts. Legal scholars immediately began debating whether Trump's move was enforceable or just symbolic. Some argued that his explanation was less about policy and more about power. The president flexing his authority to remind states that federal dollars come with federal strings. Asterisk still. The narrative resonated strongly with his political base. In towns far from California's borders, Trump's words played into long-standing resentment that coastal states, with their wealth and influence, were out of touch with real America by drawing a line between federal taxpayers and California leadership. Trump turned a complex financial decision into a simple, emotionally charged battle between fairness and irresponsibility. California officials, of course, rejected his claims outright. They pointed to audits showing funds properly allocated, emphasized the billions California contributes in federal taxes, and highlighted how much the state gives back to the nation through agriculture, technology, and innovation. Yet the technical rebuttals struggled to match the simplicity of Trump's explanation. Numbers and policies rarely carry the same weight as bold accusations delivered with conviction. This section of Trump's announcement set the stage for the broader conflict. By framing California as wasteful and ungrateful, he effectively shifted the debate from logistics to loyalty. Supporters applauded him for telling it like it is, while opponents accused him of weaponizing federal resources for political gain. In the end, his explanation may not have been airtight, but it didn't need to be. The goal was to strike a chord, to energize his base, and to corner California's leadership into defending themselves on national television. It worked. Within hours, media outlets dissected his remarks. Fact-checkers scrambled to parse every claim, and pundits debated whether the explanation held water. But in the theater of politics, explanations are often less about truth than impact. Trump's framing had already achieved exactly what he wanted. Asterisk California's reliance on federal funding is not a minor detail. In the political landscape, it is a foundational element of how the state manages its vast and complex needs. With nearly 40 million residents, California is not only the most populous state in the nation, but also one of the most diverse in terms of its economy, geography, and challenges. From bustling cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco to agricultural heartlands and wildfire-prone mountain regions, the demands on public resources are immense. Federal dollars serve as the connective tissue that keeps critical programs running, especially in areas where state revenues cannot keep pace with urgent needs. Healthcare is one of the most significant areas of dependence. Billions of federal dollars flow into California every year through programs like Medicaid, supporting hospitals, clinics, and low-income families who otherwise might go without care. When Trump threatened to cut funding, healthcare advocates immediately raised alarms about the devastating ripple effects. Without federal support, hospitals could face staff layoffs, emergency rooms might see closures, and vulnerable communities could be left without basic medical access. It was not just a political maneuver, it was a move that could jeopardize lives. Education represents another cornerstone of federal support. California's vast network of schools and universities relies heavily on grants and aid to fund programs for disadvantaged students. Special education services and nutrition programs that ensure children receive healthy meals. Federal contributions help bridge gaps in underfunded districts, giving students in low-income communities opportunities they might otherwise never see. The sudden removal of this support would not only strain local school boards, but also deepen inequalities already present across the state. Then there is infrastructure. Highways, bridges, water systems, public transit networks in California often receive significant boosts from federal funding. These projects are not luxuries. They are lifelines for economic activity, connecting goods, workers, and ideas across one of the largest economies in the world. A funding cut would stall repairs, delay upgrades, and weaken the state's ability to maintain the backbone of its growth. For a state that frequently battles earthquakes, droughts, and wildfires, neglecting infrastructure could magnify disasters. Disaster relief itself is perhaps the most emotionally charged area of dependence. Californians are no strangers to natural catastrophes, massive wildfires. Destructive earthquakes and crippling droughts have marked the state's recent history. Federal emergency funds play a crucial role in rebuilding communities, supporting victims, and deploying rapid response teams when local resources are overwhelmed. Without that safety net, Californians would face recovery efforts that could stretch for years, leaving entire towns vulnerable and displaced. Economically, California contributes more in federal taxes than it receives, a point state officials are quick to emphasize. Yet the timing and allocation of funds remain essential. Even if the state could theoretically raise taxes to replace lost federal dollars, the speed and scale required to do so would be nearly impossible in the short term. The immediate gap left by federal withdrawal would trigger budget crises across multiple agencies, forcing painful cuts and creating uncertainty for millions of residents. By cutting through these layers of dependence, one sees the deeper picture. Federal funding is not a luxury for California, but a necessity interwoven with every aspect of daily life. Trump's announcement was not just a political jab, it was a strike at the very framework of the state's survival. The threat highlighted how fragile the balance truly is and underscored the stakes in the escalating battle between state and federal power. Asterisk. The moment Trump's funding announcement hit the airwaves, the political divide in Washington deepened like a canyon. Republicans wasted no time seizing on the decision as a bold stroke of leadership. They framed it as Trump finally standing up to what they called California's arrogance and fiscal recklessness. On conservative talk shows, lawmakers praised the move as a long overdue correction to a state that, in their view, had been freeloading off federal resources while constantly clashing with national priorities. Supporters used phrases like draining the swamp at the state level and teaching California a lesson, cheering Trump's willingness to wield federal power unapologetically. Democrats, on the other hand, erupted in outrage. They accused Trump of weaponizing the federal purse for political gain and punishing millions of Americans for decisions made by their elected leaders. On the House floor, Democratic representatives delivered impassioned speeches warning that today it might be California, but tomorrow it could be any state that dared to defy the White House. For them, this was not just about money, it was about the principles of federalism and democracy. The clash immediately spilled onto social media, where hashtags like #ProtectCalifornia and #Trump vs Newsom began trending alongside #AmericaFirst. The rhetoric quickly escalated. Republican allies framed Democrats as hysterical and unpatriotic, insisting that fiscal discipline was long overdue. Democrats countered that Republicans were cheering authoritarian tactics that undermined the nation's unity. It was the classic Washington script, one side casting the decision as tough love, the other side painting it as political abuse. Yet what made this episode unique was its scale. An entire state, home to 1 in 8 Americans, was suddenly at the center of a federal-state showdown. The Senate chamber mirrored the chaos. Republican senators praised Trump for being decisive, while Democratic senators warned that the move set a dangerous precedent. Moderates, caught in the middle, tried to caution against overreaction, but their voices were drowned out by the sheer intensity of the partisan clash. Cable news networks split-screened the debates, showing dueling sound bites. One side demanding accountability, the other demanding justice. It was a political storm that no one could ignore. For Trump, the partisan uproar was a win in itself. He thrives in conflict, and this battle ensured he was once again the center of national attention. For Democrats, however, the uproar was both a challenge and an opportunity. They rallied around Newsom, framing him as a defender not just of California, but of democratic principles across the nation. Several 2024 hopefuls quickly weighed in, knowing that aligning themselves with California's plight could earn them favor with progressive voters. Beyond Washington, governors from other states began to comment, some siding with Trump and others with Newsom. This broadened the conflict, transforming it from a California issue into a national debate about state rights and presidential power. The partisan clash had ignited a firestorm that spread well beyond the Beltway, pulling every politician with ambitions into its orbit. In the end, the immediate result was gridlock. Republicans vowed to back Trump's move, while Democrats promised to challenge it in courts and in Congress. The battle lines were drawn sharply, leaving little room for compromise. For the American people watching from their living rooms, it was both exhausting and electrifying. The clash symbolized everything they loved or hated about politics in the Trump era: bold moves, furious reactions, and a constant sense that the stakes were nothing less than the soul of the nation, asterisk on the streets of California. The shock of Trump's announcement was felt in real time. Within hours, news crews fanned out across Los Angeles, San Francisco, Fresno, and smaller towns to capture the voices of ordinary people caught in the crossfire. The reactions reflected the diversity of the state itself: anger, fear, confusion, and in some corners, cautious approval. These were not rehearsed political statements, but raw expressions from citizens, suddenly wondering how their lives might be upended. In working-class neighborhoods, parents worried about the ripple effects on schools. A mother in Oakland spoke through tears about her son's special education program, which relies heavily on federal grants. "We're already stretched so thin," she said. "If they cut this funding, what happens to kids like mine?" Her words were replayed across networks, embodying the human cost of political decisions. Teachers echoed her fears, warning that classrooms already overcrowded would become even more strained if federal support disappeared. Healthcare workers voiced their concerns with equal urgency. In rural areas where hospitals depend on federal subsidies to keep their doors open, nurses described the decision as a death sentence for vulnerable communities. Ow. One nurse in Bakersfield told reporters, "We're barely holding on as it is. Without that money, people will die, not in theory, not in the future, but tomorrow." Her blunt testimony cut through the noise of political spin, giving viewers a sobering picture of what was at stake. Yet not all voices were critical. In conservative pockets of the state, some residents applauded Trump's boldness. A farmer in the Central Valley told local media, "Finally, someone's calling Sacramento out. They waste money left and right. Maybe this will make them clean up their act." His sentiment was echoed by small business owners frustrated with California's taxes and regulations, who viewed Trump's decision as tough medicine the state needed. These voices reminded audiences that California, despite its liberal reputation, is not monolithic. Students, too, made their presence felt. On college campuses, protests erupted almost immediately. Crowds gathered with signs reading "Hands off our future" and "Funding equals survival." The energy was youthful, loud, and deeply emotional. For many, the issue transcended politics. It was about fairness and opportunity. At the same time, interviews with young conservatives on those same campuses revealed frustration with what they saw as knee-jerk outrage. "We need accountability," one student said. "It's not unreasonable to demand that money be used responsibly." Perhaps the most striking reactions came from first responders. Firefighters, who have faced some of the most grueling wildfire seasons in history, spoke candidly about how federal disaster relief is not optionally, is essential. One fire chief warned that without federal support, his crews would lack the resources to respond effectively. Lives and property are on the line every summer. If the federal government steps back, entire towns could be wiped off the map. His words carried a weight that statistics and policy debates could not match. These voices from the ground made it clear that the funding cut was not an abstract political move, but a real threat with human consequences. Californians spoke with urgency, frustration, and sometimes hope. revealing the full spectrum of how a single decision in Washington could ripple through millions of lives. The story of Trump versus Newsom was dramatic on its own, but it was in the faces and voices of everyday people that the stakes became unmistakably real. Asterisk. With the announcement of federal funding cuts hanging over California, the question of legal recourse quickly became unavoidable. Lawyers, political analysts, and lawmakers began debating what options the state could pursue to challenge Trump's move. Historically, federal funding disputes have occasionally landed in courts, but rarely has a president so publicly threatened to sever billions of dollars in aid. The scenario immediately raised complex questions about the limits of executive power, states' rights, and the interpretation of federal statutes governing budget allocations. California's legal team moved quickly to analyze the situation. At the heart of any challenge would be the argument that the president cannot unilaterally withhold funds appropriated by Congress. Federal law typically requires that budget allocations passed by legislators be dispersed unless specific legal conditions are met, and courts have historically been protective of congressional power in financial matters. By threatening to cut off billions in aid, Trump had triggered a legal gray area ripe for dispute, providing the state with a potential pathway to fight back. Experts noted that the first step for California would likely involve filing an emergency injunction. Such a legal maneuver would temporarily block the president from taking action while courts considered the merits of the case. It would be a high-stakes move, requiring a convincing argument that immediate harm to residents justified swift judicial intervention. In practical terms, this would mean showing that healthcare systems, schools, and emergency services would face serious disruptions without federal support. The state's lawyers would need to balance aggressive legal action with political strategy, knowing that the courts could rule against them at any moment. Beyond the initial injunction, longer-term lawsuit could challenge the underlying legal authority claimed by the president. Constitutional scholars pointed out that Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution vests Congress with the power of the purse, suggesting that any attempt by the executive branch to withhold appropriated funds might overstep its bounds. At the same time, the administration could argue that certain discretionary funds allow the president to withhold money under specified circumstances. The legal battle would therefore hinge on interpretation, precedent, and potentially even the Supreme Court. If appeals escalated that far, political implications also played a role in the legal strategy. California officials knew that a court victory could not only restore funds, but also reinforce state authority, sending a strong signal to other states contemplating similar standoffs with the federal government. Conversely, a court defeat could embolden future presidents to leverage funding as a political tool, altering the balance between federal and state powers for years to come. This high-stakes environment meant that lawyers were not just strategizing for one state, but for the precedent that their case could set nationwide. In the meantime, California's leadership also prepared contingency plans. Budget adjustments, emergency resource allocations, and communication strategies were developed to ensure that residents would continue receiving critical services, even if federal money was delayed or denied. While legal battles proceeded, the practical necessity of maintaining state operations became a priority. The intertwining of legal, political, and logistical concerns created a tense and dynamic scenario, one that underscored how complex and interconnected modern governance has become. Ultimately, the looming legal fight highlighted a central truth. Trump's decision was not just a headline-grabbing move, but a trigger for one of the most consequential state versus federal disputes in recent memory. The courtroom battles that followed would test not only laws and statutes, but also the resilience and adaptability of California itself. Every legal motion, injunction, and court ruling would carry implications far beyond Sacramento, potentially shaping the nation's understanding of executive authority for years to come. Asterisk. Trump's bold move to cut California's federal funding sent shockwaves far beyond the state's borders, prompting nationwide speculation about its implications for other states. Observers quickly began asking if California could be targeted for political reasons, which state might be next. Governors and legislators from across the country started evaluating their own vulnerabilities, considering how federal funding disputes could impact budgets, programs, and constituents. The situation highlighted a new dimension of federal-state relations, one in which political alignment could directly influence the flow of resources. States heavily dependent on federal aid, such as New York, Illinois, and Texas, watched the unfolding drama with cautious interest. Analysts pointed out that discretionary funding, grants, and relief programs could all become points of contention in the future. If a precedent was set that a president could withhold funds for political reasons, the power dynamics between states and the federal government could shift dramatically. For governors whose policies frequently clash with federal priorities, this introduced a layer of uncertainty that extended beyond California. The national conversation also touched on the broader economic impact. Federal funding supports programs ranging from healthcare and education to infrastructure and disaster relief. A sudden withdrawal in any state could disrupt services, delay projects, and strain local budgets. Economists warned that even the perception of politically motivated funding cuts could affect investment, public confidence, and state-level financial planning. Corporations, nonprofits, and municipalities began assessing their exposure, realizing that reliance on federal dollars now carried new risks. Politically, Trump's decision energized debates across party lines. Republican leaders in states aligned, with the White House praised the move, framing it as accountability and fiscal responsibility. Democratic leaders, meanwhile, warned that such actions could weaponize federal funds, creating an environment where political loyalty might influence the delivery of essential services. Commentators speculated that future administrations might exploit similar strategies, potentially undermining the stability of state governance. Public perception became a crucial factor. Citizens in other states observed California's situation as a cautionary tale, raising awareness about the intricate balance between state autonomy and federal oversight. Town halls, social media discussions, and local news coverage began dissecting how federal funding works, why it matters, and how political tensions could directly affect ordinary people. The story quickly became less about California alone and more about the fragility of a system in which funding decisions could be politicized. The ripple effect extended to legislative bodies as well. Lawmakers began proposing bills to protect states from arbitrary federal withholding, while others defended presidential discretion in managing resources. Committees held hearings to explore the implications of Trump's decision upfront, and scholars debated the legal and constitutional ramifications. These discussions underscored the reality that the California scenario was a potential blueprint for conflicts nationwide, forcing states to re-examine their financial and legal strategies. In short, Trump's move illuminated vulnerabilities that had existed for decades but had rarely been thrust into the spotlight so dramatically. By targeting California, he created a real-world case study on the interplay between politics, policy, and public resources. Other states, whether liberal, conservative, or moderate, were forced to consider how federal power could impact their residents and what steps they might take to safeguard essential services. The incident not only reshaped California's immediate political landscape but also set the stage for a broader national conversation about the limits of executive authority and the resilience of state governance in the United States. The media frenzy surrounding Trump's announcement and Newsom's explosive reaction was immediate, tense, and unrelenting. From cable news to online platforms, the story dominated headlines for hours. Major networks interrupted regular programming to provide live coverage. Analysts debated the legality and political ramifications. Opinion segments dissected every word uttered by both Trump and Newsom. Social media amplified the intensity, with Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram buzzing as clips of Newsom shouting and Trump's statement circulated at lightning speed. Memes, short-form reactions, and viral threads spread the narrative far beyond traditional news audiences, making the story a cultural moment as much as a political one. Newsrooms scrambled to provide context, often resorting to animated graphics and explanatory segments to break down the complexities of federal funding and the potential impact of the cuts. Reporters interviewed experts, economists, and local officials to give viewers a sense of the stakes. The dramatic contrast between Trump's calm delivery and Newsom's fiery live reaction made for compelling television, creating endless discussion points that news outlets could return to again and again. Even shows outside the political sphere referenced the event, highlighting its extraordinary reach and resonance. The digital sphere magnified the intensity exponentially. Within minutes of the announcement, hashtags like #TrumpCutsCalifornia, #StandWithNewsom, and #federal funding drama trended nationally. Influencers, journalists, and ordinary citizens shared their takes, turning the political clash into a viral spectacle. Short clips of Newsom's meltdown were remixed, captioned, and circulated globally, bringing international attention to what started as a domestic policy dispute. In this environment, the story became a case study in how media coverage can shape public perception, influence political narratives, escalate conflicts in ways that traditional governance alone cannot. Analysts noted that the speed and intensity of coverage had political consequences. The constant repetition of dramatic moments reinforced emotional responses from viewers, creating polarized opinions even among people who had previously been undecided. Some Americans felt anger and betrayal on behalf of California's citizens, while others saw the situation as a justified accountability measure. Media coverage effectively amplified Trump's framing of California as wasteful and Newsom as reactive, showing how headlines and clips can shape narratives long before legislation or court rulings come into play. Asterisk. The frenzy also revealed the changing nature of news consumption. While traditional outlets offered in-depth analysis, much of the public engaged with the story through social media snippets, viral videos, and discussion threads. The attention span of the audience was fragmented, yet every snippet contributed to a larger, cohesive sense of crisis and drama. The coverage became not just about informing the public, but about creating shared moments of attention and emotional engagement, proving the media's central role in shaping national discourse. Ultimately, the media storm ensured that the clash between Trump and Newsom would not be forgotten quickly. By dominating headlines, social feeds, and conversation threads, the coverage amplified the political stakes and maintained public focus on the unfolding story. The frenzy itself became part of the narrative, illustrating how the interaction between political action and media reaction can escalate a policy dispute into a nationwide spectacle, influencing public opinion, shaping the conversation, and setting the stage for the next chapter in this unprecedented battle over federal funding and state authority. Asterisk. As the dust settled from the initial shockwaves, attention turned to what might happen next between Trump and Newsom. Analysts, politicians, and citizens alike began speculating about the coming days, weeks, and months, trying to predict how this unprecedented clash over federal funding would evolve. One scenario involved extended negotiations, where California could offer concessions or policy adjustments in exchange for restoring some of the threatened aid. Another possibility, less cooperative, envisioned a protracted standoff that could extend into courts, legislatures, and the court of public opinion. With each side doubling down on their positions, Trump's strategy seemed clear: maintain pressure and dominate the narrative. By framing California as wasteful and disloyal, he aimed to galvanize his base while casting Newsom as reactive and ineffective. Whether through speeches, social media posts, or interviews, the president was likely to continue amplifying the story to ensure that public focus remained squarely on this conflict. Every statement, every tweet, every media appearance had the potential to influence both public sentiment and political leverage. For Newsom, the path forward involved balancing defiance with strategy. His fiery public reaction had rallied supporters and garnered national attention, but practical measures were essential. Contingency planning included budget adjustments, emergency funding measures, and coordination with federal agencies to mitigate disruptions. Meanwhile, legal avenues remained under active consideration, including injunctions and potential lawsuits aimed at preserving funding and asserting state rights. Every move needed to reinforce both his credibility and his commitment to protecting Californians. Asterisk, political commentators, began mapping out the broader consequences. This confrontation could redefine state-federal relations, setting a precedent for how future presidents might leverage funding against states perceived as politically adversarial. Governors in other states closely monitored the developments, weighing lessons and implications for their own administrations. National elections could be affected, with voters seeing the clash as emblematic of larger debates over executive authority, fiscal responsibility, and the role of government. Public reaction remained a critical factor in determining next steps. Social media trends, town hall meetings, and local news coverage provided a constant barometer of sentiment. Leaders on both sides understood that public perception could either reinforce or undermine their strategies. For Trump, sustained outrage among California citizens could be spun as proof of the state's dysfunction. For Newsom, visible concern and activism among constituents strengthened his argument that federal action threatened real people, not abstract policies. Asterisk, as these dynamics played out. One certainty emerged: the story was far from over. Legal challenges, media coverage, political maneuvering, and public response would intertwine, creating a protracted and high-stakes drama. Both leaders were positioning themselves not just for immediate outcomes, but for long-term influence. Over national conversations, whatever happened next, the clash had already reshaped the political landscape, illustrating the power of bold decisions, raw emotion, and relentless media attention in shaping American governance. In the end, the unfolding saga promised to test the resilience of California, the limits of presidential authority, and the patience of the American public. Trump and Newsom had created a situation that no one could ignore, setting the stage for an epic showdown with consequences reaching far beyond Sacramento or Washington. Every decision, statement would contribute to a story that was still being written, one that could define state-federal relations for years to come. The clash between Trump and California represents more than a single political skirmish. It serves as a defining moment in the ongoing debate over federal authority, state rights, and the delicate balance of power in America. As the legal battles unfold and public opinion continues to shift, the stakes remain incredibly high. Californians face uncertainty about essential services. Lawmakers are navigating unprecedented political tensions, and the nation watches closely as this conflict tests the limits of executive action. What happens next will not only determine the immediate future of California's funding, but could also set critical precedents for how presidents and states interact in the years to come. The outcome may influence policy, politics, and the ways in which citizens understand their government's responsibilities to them. Trump's decision, paired with Newsom's impassioned response, has already reshaped the national conversation, showing that bold moves and fiery reactions can ignite debates that resonate far beyond a single state. Ultimately, this showdown reminds viewers that governance is not just about numbers and legislation, it's about people, communities, and the tangible impact of political decisions on everyday life. Whether you support Trump, Newsom, or neither, the situation serves as a powerful case study in power, accountability, and the complex relationship between federal authority and state autonomy. One thing is clear: the story is far from over, and its consequences will be felt across the country for years to come.